Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the first of. I'm actually not sure what to call this series. I did two videos previously where I talked about how to effectively play a monk in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons because I've seen them not get anywhere near the amount of love that they really should. And I've seen them misplayed a lot at the table to the point where a lot of people don't like playing monks. So I made these videos and had a really positive reaction to it from all of you guys. And people started asking me to do other kinds of informational videos about D&D and RPGs in general. And one of the things that somebody asked was, can I make a video about how to get into tabletop RPGs, sometimes called pen and paper RPGs, just in general? Like if somebody had never played one before, what kind of stuff would they need to know in order to start playing? So that is what I'm going to attempt to do here. Um, the fact of the matter is that RPGs in general are so varied, and there's so many different systems and ways to play and all this stuff that I really can't make this as an introduction to all things RPG. It would be, a 20-hour long video that I would have to, take breaks to eat and sleep for. So this is basically just going to be a kind of very broad overview of what are tabletop RPGs and some of the kind of defining features of them that you should probably be familiar with before you sit down at a table, and then some tips and things on how to get started in playing just RPGs in general. So first things first, what is a tabletop role-playing game? Or what are role-playing games in general? Back in, let's see, back in the late 70s, there was, I'm trying to see, seriously, this is not that hard. So I'm doing three different things at the same time right now. There we go. All right. So back in the late, mid to late 70s, there's two gentlemen by the names of Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax that had created this medieval war game simulator. Where it was basically two people would have these armies of medieval units, and they would fight each other using dice and things like that to help decide the outcome. And one of them had the idea, I'm not sure which, one of them had the idea, hey, what if instead of each person controlling an army and being like a commander, what if they just played one character? What if they just, like, you had control over one person? And what if it was kind of like, Lord of the Rings, where, a group got together and then they had to go on a quest to do something. And what if there was like magic and stuff like that in it? And so the first version of the first RPG ever was a variation of this war game that these two guys created. The war game system itself was called Chainmail. And they created a fantasy supplement to it where instead of controlling armies, you just controlled a single character. And that is what turned into Dungeons and Dragons, which was the first role-playing game, and it spawned an entire genre of board games and video games and books and just tons and tons and tons and tons of stuff. You can see some of the stuff that was inspired by it up there behind me. It was an amazing cultural phenomenon that's gone through some ups and downs and things like that. So what kind of defines a tabletop role-playing game? There's a couple things. In general, and that's the thing about all of this is nothing is going to be universal. There are so many different systems out there that use so many different ways to play and define things that, again, it's impossible for me to be able to tell you, this is true about all role playing games. But I can tell you the majority of them are basically going to be they're going to have some sort of dungeon master or game master, and their job is to basically control the world that the players get to live in and interact in. They will control all of the, villagers and, bad guys, and everyone that is not controlled by a player is controlled by the dungeon master or game master. And the players will control one character. If you think of modern like MMOs, where you get to play a single character and then you group up with other people to do stuff, that's based on Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, there are so many things that are based on Dungeons and Dragons. I would not be able to list them all in this video. Anything that uses experience points for you to gain levels and things like that, that is from Dungeons and Dragons. It was created for Dungeons and Dragons to show that as the characters performed tasks and killed monsters and things like that, they would become more skilled and be able to do more impressive things. That was designed, again, back in the early, the late 70s, early 80s. So all things, all those things like, even in like modern first-person shooters where they have like progression systems where with each game, if you win, you get a certain amount of experience and then it unlocks things like loot boxes and all these other things. All of that came from Dungeons and Dragons. So again, getting back to the idea of, well, what is it? So you'll have one person that is your game master. Everybody else, generally anywhere from about 3 to 7 people, though I have seen games as small as just a single game master and a player, or there are some that you can actually play alone. And I've seen ones where you've had 8, 9, 10, 12, 14 people all playing the same game with a single game master, or sometimes multiple game masters. Again, things will vary, but the basics of it are you have a game master and you have players. And the rest of it is basically cooperative storytelling. Depending on your game master, there's a lot of different ways to do it. A game master may be very similar to like the writer on a television show where they write the plot and everything like that, and they do everything except write what the players are going to do. And they have a very structured kind of system, and the players kind of get to experience the story that was written for them. On the other end of the spectrum, you can have game masters that are very much, they'll kind of create a world and they will drop the players into it and basically just react to what the players do. They'll go, hey, this is the world, this is the town that you're in, what do you want to do? And they will be entirely reactionary, and the players themselves will really control the narrative of the story. And you can have anything in between that as well. I tend to fall a little more in between that, where I do a little bit of writing for my games that I DM, but I tend to let the players really drive the story for the most part. So that's the basics of an RPG. Is you have a game master that controls the world, and then you have players that control a single character. Once you get past that, everything gets weird. If you can think of like a movie world that you're like, damn, I wish that world was real. Or if you've ever watched a movie or read a book or watched a television show and you've gone, you know what, if I had been in that situation, I would have done something different. That's what role-playing games are. Your limitations are literally confined to what the system will or won't allow. Some systems are very, very specific and very, very rules focused and mechanic focused, where they have a rule for absolutely everything. And then there's other systems that are very, very free flowing and very much, if you can explain it, you can do it. But the interesting thing about role playing games is generally you are only limited by your imagination and your creativity. To give you an example, let's say a let's use a common movie series to get everyone involved. The James Bond film series has been going since what, the 60s or something like that, 50s, 60s, somewhere around there. I don't know. I should really know this. So if James Bond was a role playing game, and you get this situation, it's a very very incredibly famous scene from, and I can't remember which movie it is, but I believe it's Sean Connery is playing James Bond, and he's strapped to a metal table, and there's a laser that's slowly moving up towards his sensitive regions, and he's sitting there, and he's tied to this table, and he can't move, and he turns to the villain and goes, "Do you expect me to talk?" And the villain goes, "No, Mr. Bond. I expect you to die." And then he leaves. In the movie, he does cool things that I can't remember off the top of my head, and he's able to get out of the situation without dying. Were this an RPG, the player would be playing the character of James Bond. The Dungeon Master would not only be playing the character of the big baddie, that I can't remember his name now. I really should know more about this. I like James Bond. And he would also step in for all the little henchmen in there. He would also be controlling the laser and deciding how quickly it moves up. You know, he takes care of all that stuff. So you as the player only have to worry about being James Bond. Now, you could follow the plot of the movie, or you could get creative. Let's say, you know, James Bond has all these little tech and gadgets and stuff like that. You know, let's say he had a flotation device. You know, just like a thing that popped out that basically was a life preserver. And he decided that the way that he was going to get out of this was he was going to take this life preserver thing that is hidden on him and was going to force it underneath one of the cuffs, activating it, thus popping the cuff off and letting him be able to escape. In an RPG, you could do that. You go, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and the game master would probably just go, okay, roll this check to see if you succeed. I will talk about rolling in a second, I promise. Or they might, he might have, one of my favorite gadgets he ever had was, he had a laser watch in GoldenEye. It was just a little watch that could shoot laser beams and cut through stuff. So let's say he has his laser watch, and all he has to do is kind of like smack his head against his wrist to activate the laser watch, cut him out of the things, and disable the thing. Or he could go a completely different approach. He has minions guarding him, waiting for him to die. He could just start talking about, wow, I am so glad that I'm going to die like this, because this is going to be, it's going to be kind of painful. But, you know, at least I'm not deluded into thinking that I'm actually going to get a cut of the profits or anything like you guys are. And then the bad guys go, what? Oh, you didn't know? Yeah, before you guys got in here, he talked about how he's going to kill you right after you guys finish making sure that I'm dead. You didn't know that? Wow, that must really suck to be you. Well, you know, it's fine. I probably misheard him, and you guys are completely safe. You know, why, you know, he was just talking to someone that he's convinced is not going to be able to tell anybody. So, you know, he really didn't have a reason to lie to me, but, you know, maybe he was. Maybe, you know, whatever. Don't even worry about it. You guys are probably fine. I'm just going to sit here and wait to die. And he actually convinces the people to let him go so that they can help him, you know, so he can save them from dying. Or he could just simply sit there and appeal to their better nature. He's like, wow, are you guys really going to sit here and watch this? You're going to watch a man get cut in half by a laser. Do you know what that's going to look like? Do you know what that's going to, and just appeal to the fact that they don't want to sit here and watch somebody die. You know, there's so many different things. Like if you can think of it, you can probably do it in a pen and paper or a tabletop RPG. Whereas in the movie, Sean Connery had a script. They had a specific way that he had to get out of it. That was the only way he was ever going to get out of it. You can watch that movie 1,000 times. James Bond will never change how he gets out of that trap. And that's really the unique thing about tabletop role-playing games, is the fact that it's limited by your creativity. It's limited by what you can think up and what you can do, and a little bit of chance. Now, I mentioned rolling before. Most, not all, most RPGs will have an element of chance, because in life we can't anticipate absolutely everything. There's always things that we can't expect. There's luck involved, stuff like that. So most RPGs will use dice to help decide that, because they're a really good way to have randomized chance brought into a game. Now, if I say dice and you are not a role player, you probably think I'm talking about this. This is a cube, commonly called a die is the singular version, or dice is the plural version. And because it's a cube, it has 6 faces. Each face has a different numerical value. Like that face here, that's 1. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And by just rolling it on the table, you will get a random number. Kind of cool. When RPG players say dice, they sometimes are going to refer to a 6-sided cube, or they may be referring to this. This is actually a 12-sided. Dodecahedron is actually the name of the shape itself. But it is a 12-sided dice. So it has every number from 1 through 12 on it. This is probably the most common one you see in most RPGs. This is a 20-sided dice. That's called the shape itself is called an icosahedron. It's got 20 faces. Each face is a triangle. So what they do is they use these dice to add a little bit of randomness to encounters. So again, if we go back to that James Bond encounter, if you were trying to convince the bad guys that their boss was going to double cross them and kill them, how most RPGs work is you will have dice for the randomness, and then you will have your character themselves will have attributes. These are sometimes called stats, attributes, ability scores. They all generally mean the same thing. They are things that kind of define how good your character is at doing certain things. You will generally have a stat for how strong you are in some way, shape, or form. You'll generally have a stat for your nimbleness or your dexterity, your ability to do very complex tasks. You will generally have a stat for your intelligence, how smart you are. Sometimes you will have another stat for not just your book intelligence, but also like your kind of streetwise intelligence, where how wise you are, or your ability to read people, because you can have book smarts and you can have street smarts. Generally you will also have one or more stats or attribute scores that deal with how charismatic you are, your ability to influence other people through persuading to them or lying to them, or things like that. So in most RPGs, you will have dice for that little bit of randomness, and then you'll have an attribute score to kind of show that there are certain people that are better at certain things. So in the situation I described before, you're James Bond, you're trying to convince them that their boss is going to kill them. Your DM might tell you to roll a persuasion check, or roll a deception check, roll a lying check. So you would roll a d20, or maybe 2d6 or 2d10, or there's a lot of different ways to do it. We call this a d20 because it is a die that has 20 sides. So if you hear the word d20, you can assume it is a 20-sided dice. If you hear the word d10, you can assume that's referring to a 10-sided die. Or d6, that's the one I showed you before. This is a d6, a 6-sided die. The reason they use a d20 is it gives the Dungeon Master a lot of control over. You basically have 5% integrals of success versus failure, because if you divide 100 by 20, where 20 is 100% chance of succeeding and 1 is 0% chance of succeeding, then you again get 5%. That's all game design. You don't need to know that to play. So again, in that situation, he would have you roll your d20 or whatever system you're using, maybe d6s or whatever, and then add your lying bonus to it. And he would have a number, generally called like a difficulty class or something similar to that, that you would have to beat with a combination of your roll and your specific ability number. And if you succeeded, then you would get the result that you wanted. And if you failed, you wouldn't get the result that you wanted. And that's kind of the basics of how all RPGs work. You will be put in a situation by your game master. You will be given something that you need to overcome. You will come up with an idea about how to overcome it, and then there will be an element of chance or luck built into it as you roll or pull a block, or there's a couple different ways to do it, or there's quite a few different ways to do it. And then you either succeed or fail. And based on whether you succeed or fail, the story moves forward. And failure, even your character dying, does not mean the end of the story in general. Unlike in like a video game, once your character dies, you reset and you go back to, and you can replay the whole thing over and over again until you beat it the way that it's supposed to be beaten. RPGs don't work that way. Characters die. Stories end in bad, you can get bad endings and things like that, and then continue the story and, all these other things. That's what makes them so much fun. That's what makes them so exciting to play, because you're not guaranteed to win. There's not guaranteed to be a solution to anything you do, and you're not going to be limited from doing things that are stupid, that are going to get you into trouble. That's one of the things I impress on most of my players, is if they want to do things like run into a shop and just start taking things because they don't have enough money to deal with it. In a game, you might get fined or, something like that, or you might not even be able to do that. You might not even be able to steal. In an RPG, yeah, go ahead. Take the items off the shelf, punch the storekeeper in the face and walk out. But you're going to have to deal with the consequences. You're a thief. You could be arrested. You could be killed on sight, and that character just ends. Their storyline ends, and you have to make a brand new character. You don't know. That's the great thing about RPGs. It's very dynamic. It's very much collaborative storytelling. So we've talked about rolling. We've talked about like attribute scores and things like that, and how most things are going to be resolved with a die roll plus some sort of attribute score. And that also means that the other aspect of it is it's a group thing. In general, you don't tend to do RPGs on your own or just with one other person. You generally tend to do it in a group. It's a very social thing. And what that means is that your group can have characters that are good at different things. So you might have one character who's really good at being sneaky and really good at like picking locks, your basic rogue archetype type character, where you have another guy who but while that rogue archetype, he's really good at being sneaky and stuff like that, he's not super strong. He's not supposed to be. He's very nimble, but he's not very strong. And then you have another guy who's really, really strong and, uses a big old great axe and, is really tough and can take a lot of hits. But, he's dumb as a box of rocks. So as far as him figuring out really complex stuff, it's not going to happen. And then you may have another person who's incredibly intelligent and is very, very good at figuring out puzzles and stuff like that. But you know what? They're book smart. They're not very good at reading people. They don't get sarcasm. They have really hard times understanding, kind of the unwritten rules that a lot of us learn. And then you might have another character really, really street smart and stuff like that, but he's the clumsiest guy in the world. He just can't seem to, he trips over his own 2 feet. Normally, any one of these characters, if you put them in certain situations, they would fail. If you put the clumsy guy in a situation where he has to walk across a tiny beam, he's going to fail. But because you have this group of people that all have strengths and weaknesses, they can work together to solve problems and come out with a positive outcome for them. And that's role playing. That's RPGs. Getting together with a group of people, given situations, and then either triumphing or failing together. That's the very basics. Different systems are going to put emphases on different aspects of it. There are some systems that are very combat focused. Pathfinder is, I believe, is the second most popular RPG on the market right now. Pathfinder is a very combat oriented system. That means when you're building your character, you are building a combatant. All of your stats and everything are somehow going to be related to how you do in combat and your ability to do things. And the different character classes you can be are kind of based on combat. Whereas like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons has combat as a core aspect of it, but it also has storytelling in it and exploration. Are all part of the mix. So in a Dungeons and Dragons game, you are going to have attributes that are primarily used for combat, and then you're going to have attributes that are primarily used for role-playing encounters, like interacting with townfolk, and then you're going to have attributes that are primarily used in just exploring, traveling around the world, finding, secret tunnels and stuff like that, or scrounging for food, tracking wildlife, so you have or finding streams for water and stuff like that, all that. And then if you get into some of the other systems like Vampire the Masquerade, it's a gothic horror system where you play a vampire. That one is they have combat that's a part of it. But the system itself is very, very political. The basis of it is vampires are called kindred in this. They call themselves the kindred. And they've decided there's this kind of ruling group of vampires called the Camilla who've decided that the only way that the kindred can exist in this world, because they are outnumbered by humans, is to convince humans that they don't exist. So they've created this system of rules called the Masquerade. And if you break the Masquerade, if you do something that will alert humans in general to the fact that vampires exist, the Camilla will hunt you down and make sure that you can't do that. And because of that, there are factions that think the Masquerade is a good thing and will do everything they can to uphold the Masquerade. And then there's factions that think the Masquerade is this horrible just power trip for the Camilla and some of the vampire clans. And so Vampire the Masquerade is this really kind of intellectual, political thing. I mean, you could almost, envision yourself kind of like a Frank Underwood or a House of Cards type situation where you're just manipulating people, and it's a lot of, conversation encounters and everything in between. There's so many different systems out there, and each one has different focuses or foci, whatever it is, whatever the plural of focus is, that you really can find one that you're going to enjoy, no matter what it is that you enjoy. The other thing about RPGs and just systems in general is the fact that not only are there different systems that focus on different things like combat or interaction or role playing, there are different like genres. Like you have Dungeons and Dragons, again, the first one. The traditional setting for Dungeons and Dragons is generally what's called a high fantasy setting, which is where you have like elves and dwarves and there's magic everywhere. That's high fantasy. However, even in Dungeons and Dragons, they have these things called campaign settings, which are the worlds that your adventurers run around in. And different campaign settings might have different themes. If you see there behind me, that's a board game. But it's based on a campaign setting called Ravenloft that was made for D&D. I believe it came out in second edition. I'll talk about editions in a little bit. And that is a gothic horror setting where instead of, they still had elves and dwarves and, gnomes and all that stuff. But instead of being set in like a medieval European style thing, you're set up more in like a Bram Stoker's Dracula kind of world. And there's vampires and werewolves and undead and a lot of horror and mystery and things like that. And it's a very bleak game world. There's another campaign setting for D&D called Eberron, which is steampunk. If you're not familiar with steampunk, it's basically kind of industrial revolution style technology. But instead of going the realm of like electricity, they kept with kind of the steam thing. And you have like clockwork stuff, and it becomes very kind of science fiction fantasy mixed. And it's a really cool system. And they have in Eberron, they have magic combined with technology and stuff like that. And it's really, really cool. So yeah, you have all these different things. And then when you break out of just Dungeons and Dragons, you have, science fiction theme things. There's a Doctor Who RPG. There are multiple Star Trek RPGs. There are multiple Star Wars RPGs. The most recent one, I believe, is made by I believe it's Fantasy Flight. Yeah, this is the most current one is done. By Fantasy Flight. It's a board game company. They make a lot of different things. And it's a Star Wars role-playing game. So if you like the Star Wars universe, and you're like, man, it'd be so cool to, play a game set in that universe, you could be a smuggler like Han Solo and, trying to dodge the Empire while, making your way. Or you could be, the last of the Jedi like Luke Skywalker or Rey in the new movies. Or you could be a bounty hunter like Boba Fett. All of this set in the Star Wars universe. They actually remove a little bit of the math involved in a lot of RPGs where they still use polyhedral dice like I've shown you on here. But instead of having numbers on them, they have symbols. They have symbols that mean success. They have symbols that mean failure. And they have symbols that mean advantage, and they have symbols that mean disadvantage. And basically what that means is instead of having to add up numbers and beat a difficulty class, you basically just count how many times you succeed on your dice and how many times you fail. And if the successes outweigh the failure, you succeed. And if the failures outweigh the successes, you fail. And advantage and disadvantage basically just means, well, if you succeed with disadvantage, then you might... let's say you're running away for some stormtroopers and, you come to a locked door. If you succeeded with disadvantage, you might unlock the door so you can keep going, but you broke the tool that you used to unlock the door. So going forward, you'll have to find a different way to open locked doors. In the same vein, if you failed with advantage, you tried opening it, you fused the lock, and you couldn't open that door anymore. But because a wire got crossed, another door on the other side of the hallway did open up to give you another route of escape. You can't go the way you wanted to, so you failed, but the advantage gave you another option. It gave you a different way that you could go, so that you don't have to deal with a bunch of stormtroopers aiming their rifles at you and possibly getting killed. So yeah, they have Star Wars role playing game. They have Lord of the Rings role playing games. They have a role playing game called The Legend of the Five Rings, which is a kind of an Asian Eastern mythology style role playing game. If you think of like kung fu movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Legend of the Five Ring would fit in. If you wanted to play a game that felt like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Legend of the Five Rings would kind of lend itself towards that. And there's countless other ones. It's absolutely incredible. At the end of this, I'll actually list a couple ones that are good kind of starting points if you do want to get into a certain genre. Um, so yeah, there literally is. You can play in literally any world that you want. Your ability to succeed and fail is based entirely on your creativity and understanding your character. And yeah, so as far as the practical application of this video, how do I start playing role playing games? The absolute easiest way to do it is to find a friendly local game store and walk into it. A lot of people don't realize game stores, like board game stores. I'm not talking like GameStop or something like that. I'm talking about board game stores. Board game stores do not work like Walmart or GameStop or, Target, anything like that, where people come in, they buy their stuff, and then they leave. Board game stores generally will have tables set up and things like that so people can come in and play games in there. They will host tournaments and things like that for games like Magic the Gathering, or Legend of the Five Rings has a card game in addition to the role-playing game. Or they may have nights where they do demos of board games so that you can play a board game before you buy it to know, if you're going to enjoy playing it. Or they may have board game tournaments like Settlers of Catan tournaments. Board game stores thrive not on just selling product, but being a place where people can come and get together and socialize and play together. That's how board game stores survive. So if you have a friendly local game store, depending on where you live, you may have one in your town. Like I live in Wisconsin. D&D was created here. Gary Gygax was from Lake Geneva. Lake Geneva is a town. It's a small town, actually, smallish town in southern Wisconsin. It's just barely on the border, on this side of the border of Illinois. That's where Dungeons and Dragons started. The original TSR building, which is the company that Gary Gygax formed when Dungeons and Dragons started picking up. The original TSR building is in Lake Geneva. They have, I believe they have a statue of Gary Gygax there. If not, they have like a plaque or something there honoring Gary Gygax because he passed away quite a few years ago. So we have, generally most towns have a board game store in Wisconsin. And if they don't, you're generally not too far away from one. Like, the town that I live in doesn't have one anymore because it went out of business. But the next town over has at least one. They might have two. When you get to big cities like Milwaukee or Madison, they have half a dozen to a dozen spread out all over the city. So here we have tons of them. Depending on where you live, that might be a lot harder. You might have to drive half an hour or an hour to get to a game store. So if you can, go to a friendly local game store, say, hey, I'm interested in playing RPGs. Do you guys have a regular group that plays any RPGs? Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is the most popular RPG currently on the market. Pathfinder is the second most popular RPG on the market. And then third fluctuates randomly. Shadowrun is relatively popular. The new Star Wars role-playing game by Fantasy Flight is relatively popular. But those are the two big ones are Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. So walk into your friendly local game store. Say, hey, I'm listening, or you could call them up. That's actually what I did. Was I actually called them up, um, and said, "Hey, do you guys have D&D groups that play?" And they said, "Yeah." And as much as you've heard, like I've seen tons of articles about how gatekeeper-ish the RPG community is and stuff like that, it's not true. Yes, there are people that are trying to keep certain kinds of people out of their particular tables, and there's always going to be people that are trying to discriminate for one reason or another. But in general, people that play RPGs are welcoming. They've done studies that have shown that kids that play RPGs tend to be more empathetic than kids that don't. So in general, people are going to be excited if you show any interest whatsoever, and they will actually help teach you the game. And that's the best way to learn how to play the game. If you want, there are tons of tutorials on how to play every single game on the market out there. There really are. YouTube is full of them. I've made 2 already. They're literally just countless ways you can learn it, but the absolute best is to go and play a game. If you don't have a friendly local game store near you, the internet is your friend. There are tons and tons and tons of ways to actually play RPGs online, very, very similarly to how you would play in a game store. The main difference being that you're using a program or a website to simulate the tabletop instead of actually being there. I know, I think the most popular paid one is called the Fantasy Grounds. You can get it on Steam. You can get it a bunch of different places. And the cool thing about Fantasy Grounds is after you purchase the game, which I believe costs like $40 or something like that, you can actually buy the rule books for literally hundreds. I know it might be into the realm of thousands, but I know hundreds of different RPG systems have Fantasy Grounds versions of them, where you will basically have the entirety of the rules at your fingertips, and Fantasy Grounds will let you build your character. It'll do all the math for you, stuff like that. So if you have money and you like that aspect, you can go with Fantasy Grounds. The system that I use to play online is a website called Roll20. One of the big reasons why I use it is it's free. And I really, really like that about that. Wizards of the Coast have just released this thing called D&D Beyond, which is an online system that allows you to build characters, allows you to look up digital copies of like the rules books and adventure modules and stuff like that, all on your phone or your tablet or your computer. That one has free aspects of it and paid aspects of it. But anyway, so there's a lot of different ways to do it, but using either Fantasy Ground or Roll20 is a great way to be able to find a group if you don't have a friendly local game store. And again, the best way to learn how to play an RPG is to play it. One of the things I like about Roll20, I don't know if Fantasy Ground has this, is they actually have a search function where if you don't have a group of friends that wants to play together, you can just go to Roll20 and search for games. And there will be some that are what are called campaigns, where they are sessions that you have weekly or semi-weekly or monthly, but each session continues the story. And so you have this overarching story that keeps going. You keep playing the same character every single session, and the story eventually, kind of works its way out. That's called a campaign. So if you're looking to join a campaign, you can search specifically for games that are going to be regular. You can also search for what are called one-shots. These are just self-contained stories. They're not going to happen every single week or something like that. Like you're going to play this particular story just once. It will be resolved by the end of the game, which generally lasts anywhere from about 2 to 4 hours. And then the story's done, and you can go try a different one or something like that. They're really great for people that don't have the ability to commit the time and effort to a full campaign, or people that just want to learn a new system and see what it's like. One shots are great for that. But all of that is built into Roll20. You can search for all that stuff. You can contact the game master and go, hey, I'm new to this. You know, do you mind having a new player? Some of them will say no. Most of them will say yes, and they will teach you how to play as you play. And because it is a social group thing, the other players that you are playing with will help you out. They will help you learn your character. They will help you to learn how to play the game and how to role play and how to do everything that you need to do. The other thing you can do is reaching out to groups like the Critters. The Critters are what the fans of the Twitch show Critical Role call themselves. Critical Role is a D&D 5th edition game that is run and stars a bunch of voice actors. So these are professional actors that play D&D, and they stream it on Thursday nights on Geek and Sundry's Twitch channel. They have developed a huge following of people that call themselves Critters. So if you type hashtag Critters into the search bar of Twitter, you will find tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of Critters. There are Critical Role fan clubs and stuff like that. And there are quite a few different groups like this that are interested in that. I mentioned the Critters because they tend to be a very welcoming, inviting group, and they're always looking for more players. There are always people that are looking for new games and things like that. So that's the other way you can do that, is you can find online communities that are looking for players. And they exist everywhere. They really do. So those are that's kind of a very broad overview of RPGs in general, and kind of what they are. And like I said, the best place, the best way to learn how to play them is go play them. Find a group, sit down. If you can do it in person, that is the best experience. It really is. If you can't, online is the absolute next best thing, and there are so many different ways to do it. Now, I mentioned that I was going to end this video by giving some examples of some of the more well-known ones if you're looking for a specific kind of RPG. So to start it off with, Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons, again, was the first one. You've heard me mention 5th edition. Dungeons & Dragons has had technically 6 kind of re-releases where they change the rule set up a little bit and they change how things work. And so each one of these is called a different edition. And the reason that I said that there's 6 is the first, they call it D&D Basic, was the first set of rules. And then when TSR was created, they came out with what's generally called First Edition. So that First Edition was technically a refinement of the basic version of Dungeons & Dragons. And then you had Second Edition, Third Edition, Fourth Edition, and then the current edition that is being sold and developed today is called 5th Edition. Each one has pluses and minuses. Each one has different things that it focused on and stuff like that. I personally think 5th Edition Dungeons & Dragons is one of the easiest systems to get into, partially because it's massively popular and partially because it was designed to bring back players of previous editions and get them excited to play the newest version of Dungeons & Dragons, and to be easy enough so that people that had never played before can sit down at a table and start playing and start getting into it. The learning curve on it is very easy, and like I said, it's so popular you will not have a hard time finding it. The other, that is going to generally be a high fantasy type game. So if you think Lord of the Rings, that's the kind of situations you're going to be put into. You know, great evils, having to deal with, magic and, undead and elven queens and, stuff like that. You know, all that stuff that you would see in like a Tolkien book, or you know, that's going to be your fantasy system. So Dungeons and Dragons, the most common, the most popular, and you'll find it everywhere. Pathfinder is the second most common. Pathfinder is technically based on Dungeons and Dragons third edition's rule set. They were first designed to be compatible so that you could use either or, and then Pathfinder became its own thing. The one issue I have with Pathfinder for new players, it is a very mechanics focused game, and it is very combat focused. So if you watch like Critical Role and you want to have a game like that where you have these really cool storylines and it's very character driven, Pathfinder is technically not designed for that. I'm not saying you can't have really cool stories and stuff like that using Pathfinder. I'm saying that's not specifically what it was designed for, and it's a very numbers heavy game. Building a character in 5th edition, I can knock out a character because I've done it quite a few times. I can knock out a character in 5 to 10 minutes that is ready to play. In 3rd edition, you're going to spend, or in Pathfinder, you're going to spend half an hour to an hour easily building your character and then learning all the different rules and the minutia of how everything works. It's a lot of numbers. If you like that, because there's a lot of numbers and there's a lot of complexity to it, it does lend itself towards people that really enjoy that extra structure so that they can very specifically and meticulously make the exact kind of character that they want. So if that appeals to you, that, you know, if you like complexity and stuff like that, Pathfinder is great for it. And again, that is another high fantasy setting. So you're going to have, you know, magic and elves and swords and, you know, stuff like that. Think medieval European style stuff. If you'd like something a little bit more contemporary, they do have they have this generic thing called the D20 Modern, which is kind of a generic system that Pathfinder was technically based on D20 Modern. Stuff like that. Or I'm trying to see the Gumshoe system. Fiasco is kind of a crime Coen Brothers style. Like if you wanted to play a Coen Brothers movie, that's kind of what Fiasco is. And if you want to see what it's like, there's a really great episode of Tabletop by Will Wheaton. It's a YouTube show where they play a game of Fiasco, and that one doesn't have any combat in it at all. It's just storytelling. So that's that. Again, other common fantasy ones. Again, fantasy RPGs are the ones that are the most common. There is a Dragon Age RPG that's super, super fun to play. I've played it myself. So if you're a fan of the Dragon Age video games, they have a tabletop RPG version of Dragon Age. So you can play, if you like the video games, but you're like, you know what, I never would have made that choice, or I wish I could have tried this or this or this. That's what the Dragon Age RPG is really made for. You're limited just by your creativity. I'm trying to think. Fantasy Age is another one that's I think it uses the same system that Dragon Age does. Fantasy Age is the more generic version of Dragon Age. They use the same dice rolling system and are very similar ones. I'm really, really going through this stuff very, very quickly. Mistborn. There's a Mistborn adventure game if you're familiar with the Mistborn book series. Seventh Sea is a relatively new one. I think it came out in the 90s, but I think they just came out with a new version of it. Seventh Sea is a swashbuckling kind of age of piracy, age of exploration style fantasy thing where, you know, you're on the high seas and, you know, there's ships and pirates and all that stuff. So stuff like that. They did have a Warcraft tabletop role-playing game. I don't think it's being published anymore, but you can always find that. If you want to do more kind of gothic horror type stuff, there is a game called Call of Cthulhu. If you're familiar with the Cthulhu mythos, it's this kind of psychological horror type thing. That is an entire system based on that. I mentioned Vampire the Masquerade. That's part of the World of Darkness series that has a lot of different things. They have vampires, they have werewolf ones, they have all this different stuff. Their newest system involving vampires and stuff like that is called Vampire the Requiem, which came out in like 2014. So if you want that kind of horror thing, or you like movies like Underworld, that would be done kind of using the World of Darkness systems. They have Ghostbusters. They have a Ghostbusters RPG if you want kind of a humorous one. There's a game system called Paranoia, which is it's set in kind of a dystopian future type thing, but it's a comedy game because basically everybody, unlike most role playing games where you're all playing together, technically all the players are trying to work together for something, but they're also kind of working against each other, and they're all paranoid, and they all have this extreme paranoia, and they're all kind of backstabbing. It's this really weird, crazy system. So that's a cool one. Science fiction in general, they had, if you remember, from forever ago, there was a television series called Buck Rogers of the 24th or 25th century, something like that. They had a tabletop version of that. They have the Doctor Who role-playing game. They have, what is it, Firefly, the role-playing game. If you remember the TV series Firefly, or the movie Serenity, which was the sequel to it, they have a role-playing game where you get to play as Mal or River or Simon, or Shepherd Book, or any of those things. They have that. They have a Judge Dredd. I don't think they're publishing that anymore. I'm trying to think. Rifts is another one that's kind of common. The Star Trek role-playing game is currently, I believe, in beta right now. They haven't officially released it yet. And then there's the Star Wars role-playing game is big. Science fiction, if you're a science fiction fan, you're either Star Trek or Star Wars. They have role-playing games for both of them. And the current Star Wars role-playing game is made by Fantasy Flight. There are 3 different rule sets that you can use that are all interchangeable, but they focus on different aspects. You have Edge of the Empire, which is designed to focus on if you wanted to be like a smuggler or a bounty hunter, those people that live on the edge, the fringes of the galaxy. They had Age of Rebellion, which is designed to give you kind of a feeling of being able to play as, the rebels fighting against the Empire, or the Resistance fighting against the Last Order. Is that who it is in the new movies? That's that. And then they have Force and Destiny, which is, playing Jedi and Sith and stuff like that. So you can pick up any one of the books or all 3 of them, and that will let you play in that system. And again, that system specifically doesn't use so many numbers. It replaces them with symbols. So you have to actually buy specific dice to be able to use it, or there's apps that you can get for your phone that are free that have the dice on them. That's science fiction in its finest. And then the other one that I generally like to mention specifically, and I think I've mentioned it before, Shadowrun is a cyberpunk fantasy kind of thing where it's set in a future where the world is controlled by corporations, and Shadowrunners are people that take jobs for these corporations. It's very kind of dystopian cyberpunk. Think like the Matrix style kind of stuff with a little bit of fantasy and magic thrown into it as well. That's a really, really cool one. And again, it's one of the more popular ones, so if you're interested in that. And then you have universal systems that don't technically fit into. You can depending on your game master, you can do Wild West, you can do high fantasy, whatever you want. And Savage Worlds is one of them. Fates is another one. The one I'm most familiar with is called GURPS, which is Generic Universal Role Playing System. It's made by Steve Jackson Games. They make things like Munchkin is a board game. They make a bunch of different board games. So those are kind of genreless. And they're designed to be able to fit really any genre. I haven't played Fate before. I have played GURPS. It's very, very complicated. It is not. I don't recommend it for new players because it's really, really confusing just because of how broad the system is, and you can make a character that can fit into any kind of genre. It gets confusing very, very quickly. So if you're going to start with GURPS, make sure you have a group that really knows what they're doing, that's willing to hold your hand and help you through it, because it's mind-numbingly confusing and very, very complex. So yeah, those are a bunch of different systems that you can get into. If any of those sounded interesting to you, you can find online groups that of people that play this, and you can find games online, or you can go into stores and play games in stores and stuff like that. Like, there is such a large population of role players out there now that finding a game is not difficult anymore. And like I said, the absolute best way to do it is go out, talk to, go to your friendly local game store, go on Roll20, go on, the Critters forums or something like that, and ask, hey, I'm a new player, I'd like to get into it. Would anyone mind me joining your game? Chances are you will find a game without too much difficulty, especially if you use something like the search function on Roll20. You can find games, you can learn them, you can try a bunch of different systems. Roll20 is designed for a ton of different systems. So you can find one that you're really going to like and then just play. And you may eventually do what I do, which is I'm a dungeon master. I'm the one that gets to run the games. And I create my own worlds, my own campaign settings. And because of that, like I've done a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, the other system I should probably mention, Open Legend, is a system that I actually run games in. It's a brand new system. It's completely free, which is really awesome. And again, it is a genreless system, but they do have a campaign setting that you can purchase if you want. That's kind of a high fantasy, kind of a techie high fantasy style campaign setting. If you do want a pre-med setting, but Open Legend is great. I love it. I'm running a Legend of Zelda RPG for Zelda Universe. It's a Zelda fan site. I run it on their Twitch channel every other Saturday, and yeah, it's literally me running a bunch of people who created Legend of Zelda characters that weren't Link, and they get to explore the world of Breath of the Wild, a customized version of the world of Breath of the Wild. So yeah, you can do just about anything with it, and it's 100% free. So that one's really nice. Yeah. So I hope this has been better than me just like rambling for an hour. I hope you guys got some interest in this. If you have specific questions, I am going to be doing a couple more videos specifically about Dungeons and Dragons because I've had people ask about it. Specifically ones that are translating helping people transition from earlier editions into 5th edition, because I've done that a lot at the table before. That's what I used to do before my mental health stuff got as bad as it is. So yes, if you do have questions about specific systems or anything like that, leave them in the comments below, or tweet them at me, whatever you want. I do respond to almost all of them. I do read every single one of the comments that you guys leave. That's why I made this video. Yeah, the other reason that I'm making all this content, if you're still watching, YouTube has changed its partnership program. Partnership is how you can monetize videos. Partnership also gives you access to a lot of other things other than money. Things like partners generally are going to be promoted easier by YouTube themselves, because YouTube is going to make money off of them. Partners get access to certain things that non-partners don't get. I have been a YouTube partner for over 3 years. Because of the new requirements, I'm going to lose my partnership status on February the 20th unless I can get 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of content watched on my video before then. So please, if you are watching this, you are not subscribed to my channel, please do so. It's really quick. You just hit the subscribe button. I need numbers, and please watch. I have over 700 videos on this YouTube channel, so check out all the different videos. There's something on here for everything. I have series on mental health. I've had series on, I have my RPG games that I stream on Twitch. I upload them on my Twitch on my YouTube channel. I've got comedy stuff. I've got, stuff where I just talk to a camera like this for a while about everything you could possibly think of. So yes, please subscribe to the channel, share this video with a bunch of different people, ask them to subscribe to the channel as well, because again, if I don't hit those numbers, then yeah, I lose out on a lot of things that I've worked for 4 years to earn. So anyway, that's all for me. I will see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.